This was William Clark's entry for May 14, 1803 in his famous journal. This would be the last entry he wrote in St. Louis for a long time, for more than 2 years. The time it took is understandable once you account for the fact that the expedition mapped new areas, established connections with the Native Americans, discovered more than 100 animals new to science, such as the prairie dog, and covered 8,000 miles. Lewis and Clark would probably lose a spelling contest because of all the words misspelled in their journals. Remember next time you have to read their journals that we know so much more because of them writing. Just be glad you're reading a book with action, silly descriptions, and pearls, other than Encyclopedia Americana with notes from a helicopter because Lewis and Clark didn't take them. Meriwether Lewis, wait, that's his name? And Thomas Jefferson were friends since childhood. When Thomas became president, Lewis was appointed secret secretary and his journey was funded. Why? So, with the help of his friend William Clark. William had been his commander in the army. Lewis came to like Clark and respect him. On June 19th, 1803, Lewis wrote a letter to Clark. He came to like Clark and respect him. On June 19th, 1803, Lewis wrote a letter. The letter told him about the expedition and invited him to take part in it, and wanted him to share the leader burden as equal to his own. Clark was at his farm when he received the letter, and he responded the next day. Well, of course he didn't get it until late July 1803 because of the snail mail. When the letter came, it was the response he was looking for. I will cheerfully join you. With that, it became the Lewis and Clark expedition. There was just one slight problem. The packing. Everybody hates packing. Some of the things on their list were 22 spades, 24 spoons, 150 pounds of soap, 3 things of salt, 12 silk napkins, 144 small mirrors, 100 magnifying glasses, and a canoe. When work was done on the boat, Lewis started down the Ohio River and picked up Clark in Clarksville. Then he also got some people that were on the expedition. The tide was low in the summer, so in many places Lewis and Clark had to push and pull the boat across sand. Sometimes they had to hire teams of oxen, whatever those are, to push and pull the boats. When they reached the Mississippi, they turned upstream and kept paddling until they reached the Wood River, which is just north of St. Louis. Several weeks into the expedition, Lewis received terrible news. Clark couldn't be made a captain. Clark could only be made lieutenant, which is, by the way, lower than captain. Lewis wasted no time in writing to Clark. I think it will be best to let any of our party and persons know anything, he said. Finally, the explorers were to leave the Wood River camp in May 14, 1804. At this stage, the expedition had York, Clark's slave, Rouillard, a jack of all trades, and Cruzet, their translator and fiddler. The Missouri was a never-ending challenge. The Russian current made it hard to paddle, and there were rocks at every turn. As the men labored over the boat, bugs like mosquitoes, gnats, and ticks assaulted the men and gave them a variety of infections. Even though the conditions were bad, there was only one death during the expedition. This was Sergeant Charles Floyd, who died of appendicitis. It was really cold that winter. The temperature dive-bombed. Only one buffalo was caught because of the cold. Sacagawea's husband had decided to let her go on the expedition where her baby would be born. During the early days of their journey, Lewis and Clark had maps to follow, but after that winter they were out of known territory. Only natives knew where to go. Lewis and Clark had been told that they could only cross a mountain coming up ahead is to get horses from the Shoshone. As they passed from present-day North Dakota to present-day Montana, the expedition came across a pack of grizzlies. Two men fired at two different grizzlies. One of them ran off, and the other charged Lewis, who fired. On June 3rd, 1805, the explorers came across a fork. They didn't know which led to the Missouri. If they made the wrong choice, they could lose weeks of travel. The northern branch of the river was muddy like the Missouri, so most of them thought that was the one. But Lewis and Clark knew it was the south one because it had a clear, stony bottom. They followed the fork until they reached the Great Falls. Then it was clear they would have to continue by land. When they finally reached a canyon with water in it that they could put their boat in, Lewis called it Gates of the Mountain. When the explorers camped, they saw vacant camps and horse tracks, so they know the Shoshone had been there. On August 13th, 1805, the explorers found the Shoshone. The people led them to their village, and Lewis met their chief, who turned out to be Sacagawea's brother. Then they bought 29 horses from the Shoshone. The most difficult part of the journey was climbing the Bitterroot Mountains because the snow made it so unpredictable. And I'm in a cave. Chances of The expedition met with a band of Salish. The Salish were friendly, and Lewis and Clark bought 13 horses from them as well. The explorers camped by the Bitterroot River that night. He called the campsite Travelers' Rest. 10 days of Missouri and accidents followed. One horse fell and broke Lewis's desk. Later, he was killed and eaten. The explorers came to a village of the Chopanish, who kept their horses for safekeeping. On October 7th, the men put their boats into the Clearwater River with 2 Chopanish guides. On October 10th, the explorers reached the Snake River, which joined into the ocean. 1 week later, the explorers reached present-day Washington. Captured by full Native Americans like salmon and dogs because they were running low. The natives thought the explorers were peaceful because of some ye olde rule. One night, a tribe of natives met with the explorers and entertained them, singing and dancing. The explorers camped for 3 days after they found the Columbia River because they could not camp anymore because of the swift water that would carry them more than 30 miles per day. On November 7th, the explorers found the ocean, but they could not see it until mid-afternoon because of the fog. During the next several weeks, the explorers looked for a place to spend the winter, and finally found it, and set to work building what is now Camp Clatsop. Lots of moles grew and ate all their elk and salmon, also giving several men dysentery. Just band together. After that winter, the explorers set off homeward and hunted elk to eat along the way. The explorers bought more horses for the Rockies from helpful natives. Not all natives were helpful, though. One tribe believed that if you weren't using something, somebody else could take it. Once the explorers reached the Bitterroot Mountains, the chief gave Lewis his horses back, and they set about climbing it. The snow was 14 to 15 feet deep in some places, and the horses kept slipping. So the first time in their journey, they were forced to turn back. Once they tried again, the snow was deep but firm, and they were able to complete the journey. After 2 weeks of paddling in the Yellowstone River,